But the main locomotive I use is this one, eh? Yeah. Yeah, I know. Okay, so how's everybody doing? So welcome to the Slum Landlord scene, the project I've been working on all summer amidst other railroad-related subjects and projects. But now is model railroad season and I'm excited. I'm fairly excited that I got most of this built, so that's getting me to a fairly finished state of the middle of section 2. And for those of you that don't know, the first section on this 26-foot long, well, almost 26 to 30 feet, is the Anasis Island, very prototypically influenced with some freelance license involved. And then this is much more freelance, this section over here, which I think I already pointed out before, but I'll just give you a quick pan just so you can see. It's a very British Columbia kind of regional emphasis here from Anasis Island, because the idea is I want to go from Anasis Island to Langley, where I live, and build two prototypical local industries there. And so the idea here is to transition from Anasis Island to Langley, which is not an easy thing to do in 30 feet, an HO scale. But because I'm an artist, I don't care about those type of things. They don't limit me. They just force me or compel me to be more creative in how I do or work in transitions. This is actually a transition zone in the middle of section 2. Section 2 goes further down another 4 feet or so, which is going to be dedicated to IPEX Plastics. So I want to talk to you about these two locations and why I sort of sandwich them together like this or stack them, okay? Just to explain a little bit of my madness so that you can understand why I'm doing things the way I do. Let me just tilt this camera a little bit more. So I wanted to, like, this particular section was where I began. The very first scenery element actually was right here, was this little Code 40 siding. But initially I was thinking, if I just had a module that was 2 feet long and I wanted to display some of my locomotives, like part of my collection, I would want this kind of a scene with at least 4 tracks. Because this particular almost sort of yard throat or sort of short line yard, which is very indicative of New Westminster, which I'll get to in a minute to explain these buildings back here, because this prototypically, and this as you see it, and this 214th overpass and IPEX Plastics is very strongly prototypical. But I'm actually overlapping them, right? Okay, I'm overlapping them and I'm like hyper crushing compression, regional compression, to go from the sort of urban to the rural, which is where I live out in the valley by the Fraser River in Fort Langley, and which is where all this kind of action is. It's a CP, CN, and SRY. Just a great place to live if you're really into rail fanning as well. So if I was to build just a 2-foot diorama to display my locomotives, and what a time to display, because the locomotives now that the manufacturers are producing are just off the charts detail. Mind you, these are older. Like this is I believe a Walther's Proto Jeep 9 that I heavily kit bashed and made into this number 122 around 2010. And the same as this MP15, which was I saved in Atlas, which was stripped. Both these were, no, this was an undeck. I had to strip this one, but to get these two locomotives, which is part of the roster, still current roster of SRY, but they have a different livery, the meatball, etc. So I'm getting off track here a bit, so let's get back on track. So I wanted this very railroady kind of look, right, to start things off. And I knew I had about 26 to 30 feet. And I wanted to do the barge step on Estes Island, and I wanted to do the Milner Grain elevator ops in Langley as the end. And so I've decided that I have to create some kind of transition zone in between, which is IPEX here, and then further down on section 3 will be dedicated to the original concept of Glover Road, okay? Now, this is prototypical, this building right here. This overpass is prototypical, and this one line is very prototypical, and the approach to IPEX Plastics. However, this scene here is from New Westminster, and it's directly related to this layer back here, which is New Westminster. What about the overpass? Well, the overpass is a stand-in in a similar way. I'm going to show you some photos as the parkade. There's a parkade right beside these buildings where you come out, and where this building is a parking lot, and then the tracks are actually right here. So this is very prototypical from New West. So what I'm doing is I'm taking sort of local in Langley and New West, and I'm merging them together in depth, okay? But I never compressed, there goes my power lines, I just knocked down. I never compressed the distance from here to this track, nor did I compress the distance from this building to this track either. It's only been two regional scenes compressed this way and overlapped, okay? So I wanted to do this because this had so much character, and I'll explain some of that as I show you the build tutorial, but this had so much character and lent itself so well to a back alley scene, I just had to build it. Although I had to merge this sort of third building to make this work where the wall is. But these two buildings are very prototypical, and I'll just show you the inspiration that I have in terms of photos for this back building flat scene, okay? Okay, and then I'll just quickly show you a couple shots of this particular prototypical scene that I modeled here. Okay, and then this is also prototypical Duncan Way, like just a section of it, all right? That is why I did this building flat back here, because I wanted to overlap and merge them together. And I thought this is, like both these scenes, layers are prototypical, but they're freelance together, okay? And I know people have mentioned this before. I just want to talk about the prototype, because the last section of this run here and section 3 is going to be heavily prototypically influenced. But there is really no like complete prototypical scene modeled, unless you do a diorama, but even then you're going to have to cheat things, because it's always, everything always works in the theater of our mind, and then when we go to model it, we're disappointed, right? We can't have it all. We want to have it all, but we can't have it. But you can still have it all if you learn some of the fundamentals about compression, and that you can actually have free license to do this kind of thing. And this is why I do it. And actually, it has made this scene very, very interesting. In fact, more interesting than each prototype scene would be as a standalone by merging the three, meaning the abandoned farmhouse, grassy knoll here, and then, the slum landlord scene back here, the alleyway, and then the cinder block building, which leads to the prototypical IPEX Plastics. So that's why I layered up and composed this scene this way. So now I want to go into this and show you some of the tutorial on how I built this, and then we can sort of discuss further about that. And then the next episode, most likely, if there isn't an update or an insert, will be the painting of these particular building flats and the sort of final formulation of this scene. Okay? So you can see that these windows, I drafted them out. And then what I like to do is drill out the center, in this case the rectangle, that I'm going to cut out for windows. And I like to just run a scored, like just a couple of passes or one pass on the clean edge of the windowsill. So when I nibble it out with my number 18 chisel head blade, you get a nice clean line. Okay, so I think this method deserves a little bit of commentary just to clear a few things up. So, number one, these are the tools that I use to do this kind of thing. You can see the different blades. There's the number 18 chisel head. This one here, I can't remember the number of that one. I don't think about that or pay attention to it once they're purchased. And I've probably had these blades for 20 years. Well, these styles. Then there's the famous and renowned number 11 blade, which every scratch builder must have. Most notably for picking up tiny parts. They're just excellent. So you need these chisel head type blades, right? And then a good sharp number 11 with a point, and then very sharp hand twist drill bits. Okay, so be careful though, right? They're sharp tools, and if you slip, it can be really bad, right? Injury. So, I just want to say that up front. Now, let me just move these aside for a sec. I'll leave this one here. So, if you're building at a 60 thou, this is 60 thou, then this is the method I like to use. Now, the thing is if you see, like you can see the thickness of it, right? It's fairly stiff. Now, if you're going to, or if you don't want to use this method, then you can go from, I guess, around 30 thou and below. You can just scribe and pop these out, no problem. But the problem with that is you're going to have to beef up the rear of the building, like to make it rigid, because it will warp. Plastic warps through heat, temperature, humidity, etc. It will deflect. So normally I'll build on wood like this on a structure that spans more than a foot or 16 inches or so, like the big warehouses and things like that. I build out of wood because they span enough distance that, they would warp if I just framed them up with plastic. Now you can glue plastic, reinforcement, angle, and everything, but that starts to get expensive or cost prohibitive, right? So that's why I do that. While the wood's expensive, yeah, it is, but then you have to decide that. Like I like to build on really good quality Baltic birch plywood, 7-ply minimum, usually in this case when you go from 1/4 inch, 3/8, half, whatever, just to protect and make the model solid, because I'm treating this as a model, like it's not just a generic backdrop, right? So you can probably get away with 40 thou drilling the corners out and scribing and popping them out, but once you get above 40 thou plastic, this is 60 once again, you're going to need to drill out and do this kind of method, and then I can clean this up, because it'll be a nightmare trying to cut these out of there. Now, I've seen people use nibblers or whatever, those tools. I don't use them. I think they're a hacking kind of tool. I don't like those tools, but each to his or her own when you do this, okay? So that's how I do it. It takes a little bit of work, but that's sometimes what model making is, right? If you're not willing to do the work, then you're not going to build it, right? So you can see now I'm kind of getting the top part of this, you know, these windows now. You can see just these top ones here, these little guys here, and then these ones. And I've basically got a good front basic template facade now to work with, okay? Okay, so I'm going to start applying some of the siding and this particular board and batten below this line right here. So this line that you see here is right here. Okay, and I'm going to use this number 4543 board and batten. So it's called board and batten, but that's all this is board and batten. It's board and batten. Okay. Now you could just cut it out of board and batten because it's 40 thou. I believe this is 40 thou. Yeah, 40 thou thick. So you can just cut a piece like this and then a plain piece and glue them together if you want. Like if you want to cut this, remember how I mentioned earlier about it's easier to cut and punch these out. If you 40 thou is kind of the threshold. Once you go above that, it gets to be a bit of a grind to cut windows out. But I want to attach this on here and then run a strip here, and then I want to attach asphalt sort of shingled siding on here, like each separate piece. They're about a foot, or no, what are they? They're really long actually. I think they're 8 feet by 12, like a brick pattern all the way down with nice texture, and I want to attach that to that. So I've sanded this nice, and so it's nice and rough to take glue, and then I'm going to attach this piece on. And then I got a short piece right here that I'll attach. And it'll be up just a little bit, so it's a bit of a foundation. Just like here on the photo, you can see there's a foundation. Sometimes we forget these little details. Like see here, the exposed cement here, but the actual board and batten drops down, but obviously they didn't finish this, you know. You know, this is the kind of things that really, you know, make statements, right? As to what's going on. Unfinished fascia and building frontages, and you know. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wait on the window trim. I'm going to put in these shingles. So these shingles, they look like they're really long. They're these long, almost asphalt type roof tiles, but applied on a vertical surface on the wall like this. Very unusual, but you know, there's a little bit of everything out there if you really look in those back alley type places where hardly anybody ever goes, and as soon as you think a building isn't done a certain way, you'll find out you're wrong when you really get out and check out some of these dilapidated areas. So to do this, I want to lay these on with strips by hand and overlap it from the bottom up. And so rather than use strip pre-cut, like that's not very cost efficient, I'm going to take some of this number 9010. This is the plain sheets. They're 10 thou thick. You get 4 sheets in here, which is, you know, pretty good value, right? And then I'm going to cut strips from this, but before I do, I'm going to rough it up first. And the reason why I do this is because, well, number one, you can draw lines on it much easier with a pencil, and it'll take glue much better when you break the smooth surface tension down on any of this plastic, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw lines, and I'll use my HO scale ruler, and I'll cut, like they look to me like they're 8 feet long, but I'm just going to make them 6 maybe. Like I'll determine that, but I think 6 would be more appropriate. I can't really tell here. So here's, well, they look quite long actually. There's one like here and then down to here. So they do look like they're probably 8 feet or 6 feet by a foot. So I'm going to just do marks and then just cut lines, scribe and snap, and then just cut sections, and then I'm going to make a whole pile of them and then just start popping them on one at a time, okay? Okay, so I'm going to cut these fascia tiles or wall tiles, you know, and I'm cutting them at 8 feet. Now you can cut these the way you want. You can stack them, you can line them up with a square. I like cutting these individually like this quick because I don't want the lines to be perfectly square when I join them together because of the glue, because then you'll lose the line, you'll lose the, you know, definition of the line, like as an engraving when you put a wash on it. So if you just cut them freehand and you mix them up and then you go to line them up, they'll never, like, won't be perfectly lined up the seam, and you don't want them to be, right? So that's why I'm doing these randomly like this. If you take a number 18 blade like this and you just put it on the mark and press down, you don't have to be perfectly in length, right? They're close enough. And if you do it like this, spend 20 minutes, cut them all out, you'll end up with those random mating lines that help define the gap between the shingles. That's why I'm doing it this way, because it's not a roof, it's a face of a building with windows. It's going to show. Okay, so I want to show you a couple of things about laying these shingles in now. As you can see, we'll just call them shingles for the purposes of the video. So what you want to do is on your base plate here, okay, facade, you want to make sure you lay in registration marks. So these are 1/2 inch lines all the way across, okay? Just with a ruler, mark, run some horizontal lines, right? So that when you go to lay in your shingles and tiles like this, okay? Let's just drop one in here like this. So I know that roughly as I lay each one, that you see this line here, I'm going to leave that same amount of gap all the way down. Because if you don't have these, you'll run out, like your bricklaying or your layering of shingles will start to go further up one side, and by the time you get way up here, it compounds and multiplies and becomes worse as the higher you go. So these are registration marks to check that, to keep this line that you eyeball in check, okay? Okay, so I just got a few more parts that I want to show on the build. If I cut it off here, then you'll miss out on. I didn't want to carry the video too long, so I'm going to put this part into two parts, or if I can squeeze it in on the final part where I do the paint. But that has quite a bit, well, a fair bit involved in that too, and I don't want to stretch them too long. Like I know some people have mentioned about length of videos, but you know, I don't know what people's tolerance is these days out there in social media, so I try to keep them about half an hour. But if you want to share your opinions or comments below about that, that's up to you. But yeah, so that's what I'll probably do then, and then we'll try to bring this particular scene to a close in its primary form anyway. Okay? Cheers.